Is it a good idea to be stacking copper? Should we be seeking this as a new alternative to silver now that the prices keep going up? Well, it's not something that we talk about here often in this channel, but let's break it down whether or not copper is actually worth stacking. So let's go. Hi everybody, and welcome back to yet another video. So stacking copper, well, it's not a video that I really do often on. I think the last time I actually did one on copper was like 2 years ago when I first started the channel. And so I think with everything going on in the precious metals markets, and just also within the comment sections and the live streams that I've been doing, I've been asked a lot lately about my opinions on copper and whether or not I would stack it the same way that I would with gold and silver. Now, for some reason, I can't find the poll that I asked the community about when it comes to stacking copper, but if my memory serves me right, it's something I think it was about like 50 or 60% of you said that you wouldn't stack copper. So majority of you still do not see copper in the same regard as you would for stacking gold or silver. Even so much so as to maybe even pivot away from any of those areas or starting into something new just because of prices or whatever justification you may come up with. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who are avid copper fans, and I'm not here to point out who is right or who is wrong. This video is just going to be about going over my opinions and whether or not I believe copper will play a part in anybody's stacking efforts. So I promise there's no hate to any of the copper fans out there. I promise. So this might not be a surprise to any of you, but based off the box you can see in front of me, our pennies, any of the ones before 1982, used to have copper in them. The old content ratio used to be 95% copper and 5% zinc, but any of the modern pennies today is now kind of flip-flop. So they now have 97.5% zinc and only 2.5% copper. So kind of similar to, I guess, a little bit of how the silver dimes used to be. They used to have a certain metal content in them, and now that's been kind of taken away out of circulation, more or less. And so if you were looking to stack or save any of these copper pennies, they're actually going to be worth more than the face value. In fact, the melt value alone is going to make each individual penny worth about 3 cents, just based on the contents alone. And if you were to have a full, let's say $100 face value worth of pennies, then that would actually be worth $343.46. So in some ways, you're going to get more out of it just by saving those pennies. Kind of similar to how the 90% junk silver works in the dimes or quarters or any of the half dollars. Now, that's if you can melt them, of course, and it's still technically illegal to melt pennies for profit, but with the latest discontinuation of pennies, I wonder if that will change in the future. And eventually, I'm sure they will be phased out for the use of pennies. So eventually, the banks will, when they receive all their pennies, they're going to be sent to be melted, and all the contents will be put to use somewhere else. So until then, saving those 1981 pennies, and some cases the 1982 ones, that could be a move to make when it comes to owning some copper. It's going to be free to do, and you don't have to look too hard to find them, unless you get real lucky and you find something like this 1901 Indian head penny like I did in a cash register from a previous employer that I used to work for. So other than the constitutional copper, what other options do we have? Well, again, fortunately, copper isn't too hard to find, and you can get a lot of it out of any household electronics or any electrical wires that you can find, or you can score a giant spool of copper wire. And just for fun, let's take a look at this one here that was actually in my grandmother's possession. And you can see here, if we look at the date on the little sticker, it shows that it dates back as far as October 16th, 1980. So this thing has been wound up like this for 45 years. And so you can have multiple options when it comes to owning copper, but I think the more likely way that people in this community will go about it will either be via the pennies or any of the copper rounds or bars that any of the online dealers will sell. Now, the problem that I see with copper is very much how silver is at times. It can be very bulky if you stack it, and the issue of weight and space gets exacerbated even more so with copper. Not to mention the premiums on these alone. If you were to buy a round or bar from a dealer, they run extremely high. Essentially, it's equivalent to paying over $500 per ounce of silver for 1 ounce of silver Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay over $500 for an ounce of anything, especially for silver. But, well, again, copper is cheap, but that's the equivalent math behind how much you'd be paying for a 1 ounce copper round. Now, the second reason why I don't think copper is going to be beneficial to stack is because it is a base metal. It's not a precious metal. Copper is essential and valuable in its own right, but it doesn't carry the same rarity or monetary value that gold and silver does. And copper can be just as volatile as silver. I mean, if we look at the chart here, just going back as the past, I don't know, let's say 20 some years or so, then you can see that there have many periods of ups and downs and a lot of sharp dips now and then. So you could make the argument that it is going in the upward direction. So, it's possible that this could be something to be worth looking into. And I know a lot of people have been priced out, especially in terms of gold. And it seems like those levels of mindsets tend to be shifting downwards. So now that since gold is out of reach, silver is the new gold and copper is going to become the new silver. At least some people view it that way. Now, I personally don't share those views, and I think copper isn't going to replace silver, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't keep the things that you see here on the table. I think there could be some potential with copper, at least in terms of selling it for profit, but to consider it a precious metal or a replacement to a precious metal isn't something I would really advocate for. And as far as I see it, even if I melted all of these down into my own form of bars or rounds, I could just sell them for their value in terms of its weight, and I could say the same for aluminum. And I don't think any of us would want to be an aluminum stacker. So I would pair those two into the same, area or the same category to some degree, but as they don't really do much when it comes to preserving your wealth, because that's why we stack gold and silver, is to preserve our wealth. And although if you do like copper and you have an interest in owning it, then getting the rounds that could be a collector piece, like a set of something, is totally fine. Again, I'm not trying to bash the copper stackers out there. I just personally don't think it's going to be the new thing. But if you like it and it's something that you want and it's cheap to stack, then it has a nice design, then by all means, you should totally do that. I don't think anyone here in the stacking community would care enough to throw a fit over something like that. But either way, I think that if you were to ask what my overall opinion on copper is, I would say that it can be fun to collect. Saving the constitutional pennies and finding any old pieces like the Indian head penny, or if you were able to get any random copper through with wires or any bits and stuff that you can find, can be good for reselling. But as far as stacking goes, I don't think copper will replace or become the new form of silver. But only time will tell to see who's right or who's wrong, I guess. Well, there you have it, guys. Let me know what you think. Are you planning on stacking copper, or have you always been a copper stacker? Let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye, guys.